Hi, Carmel Valley Summer Symphony. My name is Paul. I am the violin instructor this year, and today we're going to be talking about music school and a little bit of career and all that stuff. Now, before we start, a little bit about myself. So I went to Westview High School here in San Diego, and then after that I went to San Francisco Conservatory of Music, where I got my bachelor's and master's in viola performance. So viola is my main instrument, but I do play and teach both viola and violin. And during the day, I kind of go around to schools like CCA, which some of the students run this program, and also Westview High School, Oak Valley Middle School, and I just go in as coach. But majority of the time, I am a private teacher, where I teach both violin and viola. So yeah, that's a little bit about myself before we get started. So I have a list here, where I kind of wrote like a rough draft of what we're going to be talking about today, and hopefully this answers some of your questions. Let's get started. So the first thing I wrote down was the selection of different schools. So when you're applying for college, at some point you're not just, most likely not just applying for one, you're probably applying for multiple. And as a music major, you do have the option of applying for regular university, or a music school where you're strictly just training to become a professional musician. So the first thing I would say, one of the most important consideration about selecting the different schools is the teacher. The teacher you're applying for, essentially, whoever it is you're trying to apply for, you do have to make sure that you and the teacher get along, and you feel like you can learn a lot from them, kind of thing. And I'll get to that later in this video, but I would say teacher is probably, for me, my personal opinion, is on the top of the list. Some people go to schools for their names, and for the school name like Juilliard or Curtis, things like that. And those are great schools, but if you are only choosing those schools because of the name and not because of the teacher, you might not be getting your full money's worth in this case, because you do spend a lot of money going to schools like that. And so teachers would be on top of my list. The second thing is the strength of each school. So different schools have different things that they're really, really good at. And for example, like if you really want to become an orchestral musician, I would say sometime in your undergrad or graduate studies, you might want to consider looking into like Rice University. They're probably the top in the country in terms of developing professional orchestral players. They're really good on orchestra excerpts. If you're looking to become a soloist, probably Curtis or Juilliard. They're really, really known for that. If you're looking into chamber music, I know that New England Conservatory and as well as San Francisco Conservatory, the school that I went to, they're really, really good at chamber music. It's one of their big focus. So that's one of the things to consider as well. And last but not least, I would say money plays a pretty big role. If you go to like a regular university, it's probably not going to cost as much as a private school, and especially like a private university. And a lot of times you can get scholarships depending on your financial situation, as well as your playing potential after they hear you. If you're really, really good, the teachers would probably put in a good word for you, and you can probably get more scholarship. But it all really depends on the school and on your capabilities and the financial need. Now, the second thing that I wrote down is the application process, as well as the auditions itself. So application process, one of the things that you're probably worried about is GPA and SAT and things like that. So regarding GPA, if you're majoring in music at the university, let's say GPA still comes in play somewhat. If you're going to like a UCLA, and they have a pretty good music program, but you still have to have like a pretty good grade, I would say, in order to get in. I don't know if they make exceptions. I mean, unless you're like super good, I would say, like a football player, like one of those like really good players, like they might make some sort of exceptions, but most of the time you probably still have to have a decent, like a pretty good GPA in order to get into that. SAT and ACT, things like that as well. But if you're doing a music school, that's where I came from and went with. So music school works a little bit different. I didn't really study much for SAT or ACT. In fact, when I applied for like San Francisco Conservatory, they didn't really, they didn't need SAT or ACT. They do need like a decent like GPA. I think if I can do an advice on grades for schools and things like that, like pass your classes. It's not like it doesn't matter. It still matters. Pass your classes, but if you really care about doing music and that's your like, one only goal, then spend a lot of time practicing. Okay, like straight A's is not going to get you into a music school. It's going to look good, but it all comes down to your playing. So pass your classes, don't have like below, what is it, like 2.5 or something, but just do decent. Now pre-screen is the first step for a lot of the schools. That's just like a process where they weed out anybody that they think is not gonna even have a chance based on their playing ability. So pre-screen sometimes it's audio only, sometimes it's both video and audio. And you send that in and they hear you or listen to you play, and then they if it's a pre-screen, they'll let you know if you go in for the live audition process. And some schools skip out the whole pre-screen and they just do live audition, but it really depends on each school. And on I would say for audition, here's one small advice. So if you are applying to like 5 different schools and you're auditioning 5 different times, different dates, make sure that the school you're really into and you really want to get into is somewhere like in the middle. So like the 3rd or the 4th audition out of 5 would probably be good. Often you can select the dates, to like audition certain day, and just try to make it so that the best school you're going for is somewhere in the middle. For a pretty simple reason, you're going to be nervous, okay? And it's better to, the backup schools that you're trying to get into, just put them in the very beginning, and just use that as like a, getting rid of your performance anxiety, things like that, and just kind of get used to it, and then save the best for somewhere in the middle. And I think in the middle because you don't want to be tired. A lot of times you apply for a lot of schools, it's a lot of traveling over like in the span of like several weeks to months, maybe even a couple months, and you don't want to be too tired. So don't put it at the very end, put it somewhere in the middle, is my advice for you. And so there are some things that you might be tested on, like music theory and musicianship, which is your training, like your listening and writing down, music chords and other stuff. Maybe even music history. Sometimes they might test on that. Those are things that you gotta. I wouldn't say like you need that. It might be good to know some because you might be able to get out of certain classes. But if you like completely don't know anything, that's fine too. But yeah, just something they might test you on the day of the audition at some point, or it might be after you get into the school. Now, let's see. So, what they look for in auditions. As a teacher, I think some things that they look for are your capability, your potential, of course, your hearing, like if you're playing in tune and things like that, if you're playing with good sound and things like that. But I think overall, like most teachers look for a well-rounded player, someone who's got pretty good intonation and things like that, so that you have room, like they want someone, has room to work with. And it's not just all about like, like, oh, I can play this piece, and then you get it. Like a lot of people are going to be playing the same repertoire, the same pieces that everybody else auditions with. And so what sets you apart? That's very important. And one of the things that I strongly encourage you to do is to take a lesson with your prospective teacher that you potentially want to study with at different schools. Like take a lesson, set a time. I would recommend like a month or 2, or maybe even 3, like before your audition. And so like take some time, like you might be in school, like you're like senior in high school or something, like take some time and go through like travel around to wherever you're trying to go, want to go to study, and then like take lessons, because it's going to set up in a way that, first you get to know the teacher and the teacher gets to know you. Okay, it's a two-way street. When you audition, it's not just you auditioning for the school, it's also kind of like you seeing how the school and the teacher, if that's something you want to work with. But ultimately, I would say take a lesson, because the best scenario is that they give you suggestions, and then a few months later you have the audition and you show up improved with what they said. That says a lot about a student and a musician. So that's my advice. It's just have the lesson before. Sometimes after works too, but usually before. Now during the lessons, I encourage you to be engaging. You can start maybe practicing with your private teacher. Just be engaging in a sense, like ask questions, not just generic questions like, oh, should I be a down bow, but things like that. Like actually think about some questions you might potentially want to ask from the teacher. That way they know, like, you are thinking in your head, and that it's not just them spoon feeding you like how to play this and how to play that kind of thing. They want to see you develop not just as a musician, but as a person. And that a lot of times, in music, you don't just play by yourself. A lot of times you're working with other people. So that's very important. Okay, so the third thing that I wrote down is types of career in music. So the standard ones are like orchestra, maybe even teacher, like classroom or private. I am a private teacher. I'm not a classroom teacher. I sometimes go into the schools to coach, but as a specialist, I'm not like doing all the email and paperwork and be in school all day long kind of thing. There's other jobs like chamber music, if you are interested in quartets or things like that. You can form one and both give concerts. It's not like the easiest route, but it is possible. A lot of times those people also those chamber groups also do freelance work, where there are a lot of musicians out there freelancing, and one of it is like doing gigs, like playing at a wedding and things like that. And as a quartet, it's not hard to find jobs like that. And you freelance can also like be a substitute for an orchestra, or just being asked to perform somewhere, things like that. There's a lot of different work you can do. There's also solo. That's probably the most difficult. If you want to do solo, you gotta win competitions, is my suggestion. You gotta win competition because that's the fastest way and the most effective way to get your name out there. And last but not least, actually, in music, you can probably do like managing stuff, or if you went to university, and that's one of the things about universities versus music schools, you can double major. Maybe you can like do major in math and then science or something, or business, and then you can do music. And so in music field, like it's not just all playing. Like there are people behind the scenes managing paperwork, if that's something you're good at and you want to do. Maybe graphic design if you're good at that. For different companies or organizations like San Diego Symphony or something. And those are all potential careers, not just playing. Like you can still play, but there are just different ways you can make a career from music. And now a little bit about the conservatory life versus university. So in San Francisco Conservatory, I lived in a dorm like a couple blocks from the school. So it's not like a university where it's like the whole area is like that school, like because my school only had like 400-ish students, so it's not very big. It's just one building, and then a different building is like the living place. Classes, when you go to university, you do take classes like math and science and other general GED things, but for music school you don't take those classes. Those aren't required because you are at music school, and they just strictly want you to train to become a professional. So you take classes like theory, music history, musicianship, other forms of music like singing, choir, sometimes is required, and just other things that are all music related. Your most general ed, I would say, is probably like some sort of regular history class, and writing, maybe English classes. But math and science and things like that, I don't think any of the music schools do it. Performing, a lot of times you get performance opportunity, orchestra, chamber music, playing quartets, and recitals. Solo recitals is a benefit of majoring in music. A lot of times it's required if you are at a certain year in school, like your junior or senior, you have to give like a solo recital kind of thing. And at the end of conservatory, you have juries that you have to play, which is you play in front of all your teachers, the teachers that play your instrument, that teach your instrument, and you play in front of them to get evaluated. The same people that listen to you when you audition in. They just want to see if you are still at your current, like improving and things like that. It's quite important. I've seen people not perform well on that and then get removed from the school. So it's somewhat important, but that's something you just have to go through. And if you practice every day and practice well, that should be a normal thing. So those are the few topics that I can remember or I came up with. Hopefully this answered a lot of your questions, and I'll leave my email for you guys. So my email is paulw0310@yahoo.com. So one more time, paulw0310@yahoo.com. You can email me any questions you have. I think a lot of you are like in middle school and maybe some in high school and things like that. But if you ever have questions about applying for music or just other questions I didn't answer here, feel free to ask, and I'll answer back as soon as I can. But yeah, I hope this was helpful for you guys. Thank you, and have a good one. Bye-bye.